This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. This is Razib Khan with the Unsupervised Learning podcast. And so I am here today to talk about a new paper. So it's another monologue. It's been a while. I should probably do more of these. People do enjoy them, but they're a little bit more difficult than just having a conversation where you have someone back and forth, because I have to keep talking. But I want to summarize a new paper, just talk about its implications, what it means, and how we understand human origins and the Out of Africa movement and human population structure within Africa before the Out of Africa movement. So the paper is in Nature. It's open access. You can read it yourself. It's published April 2nd, 2025. It is titled Ancient DNA from the Green Sahara Reveals Ancestral North African Lineage. Okay. The first author is Nada Salem. The last author is Johannes Kraus. Kraus is a paleogeneticist at Max Planck. He does a lot of good things. Not quite up there with Eske Willerslev or David Reich, the great ancient DNA duopoly, but he's up there. You could say maybe he's Dr. Pepper if they're Coke and Pepsi. He's coming up there. So, let me just read the abstract in full, and then I will talk about what I think is important in the paper and why you should read the paper. It's open access. It's quite readable. It's not that long. It's a Nature paper, so they're not that long. There's some supplementary information actually, but you don't need to read that necessarily. But it's often good to read the supplementary information, I do have to say. But okay, so the abstract, let me just get that out right now, and I will read it. And excuse my pronunciation of certain things, because I don't know these things either, or these regions. Abstract. Although it is one of the most arid regions today, the Sahara Desert was a green savannah during the African Humid Period, AHP, between 14,500 and 5,000 years before the present, with water bodies promoting human occupation and the spread of pastoralism in the Middle Holocene epoch. DNA rarely preserves well in this region, limiting knowledge of the Sahara's genetic history and demographic past. Here we report ancient genomic data from the Central Sahara obtained from two individuals, approximately 7,000-year-old Pastoral Neolithic female individuals buried in the Takarkori rock shelter in southwestern Libya. Parenthetically, I'm just going to call it TKK after the abstract. The majority of the Takarkori individuals' ancestry stems from a previously unknown North African genetic lineage that diverged from sub-Saharan African lineages about the same time as present-day humans outside Africa and remained isolated throughout most of its existence. Both Takarkori individuals are closely related to ancestry first documented in 15,000-year-old foragers from Taforalt Cave in Morocco, associated with the Iberomaurusian-lithic industry and predating the AHP. Takarkori and Iberomaurusian-associated individuals are equally distantly related to sub-Saharan lineages, suggesting limiting gene flow from sub-Saharan North Africa during the AHP. In contrast to Taforalt individuals who have half the Neanderthal admixture of non-Africans, Takarkori shows 10 times less Neanderthal ancestry than Levantine farmers, yet significantly more than contemporary sub-Saharan genomes. Our findings suggest that pastoralism spread through cultural diffusion into a deeply divergent, isolated North African lineage that had probably been widespread in North Africa during the late Pleistocene epoch. And so late Pleistocene epoch is basically the end of the Ice Age. When the Ice Age ends, 11,500 years ago, I think, then the Pleistocene is over, and we are starting with the Holocene. Why is this a big deal? So it's a big deal because the Green Sahara is a big deal. Those of you who are not, paleontology, paleoanthropology nuts, paleoecology nuts don't maybe know what the Green Sahara is. There is a figure 1 shows a map, and basically what you see here is most of what is today the Sahara Desert is not desert. There are pockets of desert, pockets of deep desert in the east around what is now northern or Sudan. It used to be northern Sudan. Lake Chad, which is tiny now, is a massive, massive lake in the center of central area of the Sahara. And then you have areas of steppe, shrubland, and semi-desert, large areas of semi-desert. You also have rivers, internal rivers, all across the Sahara during this period. Now, in the Sahara itself, many people don't know this, but there are some really high mountain ranges. I think the Tibesti Mountains in southern Libya and northern Chad are the highest, but they're not the only ones. But they go pretty high. The Tibesti, let's see, the Tibesti Range, the highest mountain in the Tibesti Range is, I think it's like 14,000. Yeah, so I think double check. The highest is 11,200. Okay, not 14, but 11,200. So that's pretty high. 11,200 is kind of like where, like, Lhasa, Tibet or something is, so there's more precipitation, there's more things up there, even though it's still kind of deserty. It's colder, But back during the Green Sahara period, when it was much wetter, Tibesti would have had a lot of woodlands and other things. There's other areas. There's the Air region, and a couple of other areas in the Central Sahara that have mountains, and they're a little bit more humid. And during the Green Sahara, they were really humid, and rivers came out of them. And there was a relatively lush landscape. The interesting thing about the Green Sahara is not only did the savannas go northward, but there were also woodlands, like Mediterranean woodlands and stuff in the north that were also spreading southward. So during the Sahara itself, during the modern Sahara, the two have retreated a lot. In the past, basically in 3000 BC, the beginning of ancient Egypt, it was the end of the Green Sahara. So that's why they had giraffes and all these other things in the oldest Egyptian, rock art and whatnot. I want to say before the Green Sahara, before 14,500 years ago, Sahara was actually more intense. It was a bigger desert. It was drier. The Ice Age, there was less precipitation. There was less precipitation all across the world because there was less humidity in the air. There's less water vapor in the air because the world was cooler, and so Sahara was actually like pretty intense and must have been very forbidding during the peak of the last glacial maximum, when the rainforests were like fragmented in Congo and other places, and the Sahara itself was probably extremely parched. And I think this goes to explain the fact that there's no sub-Saharan, south of Sahara admixture in some of these North African peoples, because almost no one probably crossed the Sahara during the Ice Age. During the Green Sahara, they did, but during the Green Sahara, populations were expanding southward, northward. They might not have necessarily met each other, or there's incomplete admixture, whatnot, right? We do know that before Islam, there was far less sub-Saharan African admixture in North Africa and in, say, what is today Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, the coastal areas. These are areas where, depending on where you are, in Morocco, you could be as much as like regularly like 10 to 20% sub-Saharan African ancestry. In Algeria, somewhat less. Tunisia, somewhat less. In the highlands of Algeria, there are Kabyle people, Amizigh, Berber people that have almost no sub-Saharan African ancestry, but they have some. And most of this dates to the Islamic period, when Muslims opened up trade routes to the south, brought slaves north, salt south, gold north, these sorts of things. There was some trade during the Roman period, but not nearly as much. There were sub-Saharan Africans in the Mediterranean during the Roman period, but not as much. So we're talking going from like 10% of the population during the Islamic period. We're doing the Roman period is probably more like 1% max, really closer to 0.1%. So Africans, North Africans, Mauritanians, all these other people. Mauritania was a region of Algeria at the time, actually, Algeria-Morocco border. These peoples were Berbers. They're Afro-Asiatic, and so they were not sub-Saharan African at all. During the Islamic period, there was much more sub-Saharan African ancestry that came in because of slavery And, this came with the Moors in Spain and other places, but it does color our perception of North Africans and Maghrebis somewhat different than what they were in antiquity. In any case, it's really interesting that it doesn't look like, according to the statistics that they use, looking at the genomes, and they had more than 800,000 genetic positions, single nucleotide polymorphisms to work with in one of the individuals. The other individual had like 24,000, so not super important. But that's a lot of genetic positions. 23andMe's SNP array is like 600,000, I think now. Typical SNP array, I have a SNP array that's like 950,000, right? From 23andMe, like a particular version. Point is, they have a lot of data to work with from this individual, and they can infer a lot. It doesn't seem like there's much sub-Saharan African ancestry in this individual, so that indicates that the Green Sahara did not connect the north and the south very much for whatever reason. For most of this period, they were not pastoralists; they were foragers, fragmented landscapes, perhaps cultural differences. I don't know, but in any case, it's interesting that there was this period for not quite 10,000 years, but almost 10,000 years when the Sahara was extremely livable. There were all these people, and there was this vast North African human population that was quite distinct, it looks like now, from Eurasians, and I'll get to that later, and also from the sub-Saharan Africans to the south. One thing notable about them is they were pastoralists. They adopted pastoralism, and there were lots of arguments about how that came to be. This population in southwestern Libya, so deep in the Libyan desert today, in the antiquity, it was like probably the homeland of the Garamantes, I think they were called. And today, the people in this part of Libya, so because of slavery, a lot of the people in the oases in the Sahara, the cultivators, the agriculturalists, they are what we would call black. They're sub-Saharan African mostly. They have some admixture, obviously, with the native Tuareg, with the Berber people, and also with Arabs, but they look more black. The pastoralists, the Tuareg, they look less black. They look more North African, although they also have African admixture, sub-Saharan African ancestry. So these people are all mixed with each other, but it's to various degrees, right? In any case, people in the oases right now in the Fazan and in areas of Libya, they look quite black. But what we see here in these data is this area of the people were not sub-Saharan African at all. I think, like they say, 6,000 BC is the or 7,000 years ago. Yeah, so 5,000 BC, right? 5,000 BC, like a couple thousand years before Old Kingdom Egypt. The people in southern Libya, verging on the border with southwestern Libya, verging on the, I think the border with Niger, were North African. They were not sub-Saharan African. There's no admixture. It's a little surprising. They have about 10% Levantine ancestry. So that means that there was some contact with pastoralists that were coming out of the Middle East. But most of the genetic impact was not mostly genetic impact. It was mostly cultural impact, right? If you are interested in archaeology and, maybe a little bit of pseudo-archaeology, one of the interesting things that often comes up is that, there are rock shelters, and they depict people in these rock shelters, humans that don't look like they're black in the Sahara. And it's like, oh, they're white people, or, all sorts of weird speculations. I don't know what the color they were, whatever. They probably looked not that different from some modern North Africans. So probably not sub-Saharan African looking, but, not white as such. But the point here is those rock paintings that depicted people that didn't look like they were black African probably do reflect a reality that during much of the Green Sahara's period, the people that were dominating much of it were not black African. So I think this is genomics is confirming a little bit of, if you read the Time Life books from the 1980s and stuff like that, you know what I'm talking about. If you're of a certain age, they're on mysteries, ancient mysteries, and all this stuff like that. Their books were like half true, half kind of like, exaggerations, a lot of pseudo-archaeology. But still, this suggests that there's some basis in this. So pastoralism spread into the Sahara. It looks mostly through culture rather than genes, which is different than, say, in Europe, where early European farmers basically swamped out the native foragers, more like parts of South Asia where there's more synthesis maybe. Archaeologists and anthropologists need to figure out why there's different dynamics in different places, right? So the people in the Maghreb, for example, at about the same or way earlier, have much more Levantine ancestry, have much more ancestry related to populations in the Near East, even 10,000 years before these Libyan people in the TKK samples, right? So that means that it's admixture with Middle Eastern peoples is patchy all across the Sahara. So these people are way later than the earlier Taforalt sample from Morocco. The Taforalt sample is 10,000 years older. It's in the Pleistocene. It's in the Ice Age. And it has about 60% 60% ancestry from the Levant. About 40% is actually related to this new population. This new population is much, quote, purer, but it's also in the deep. Well, it's not in the desert at the time, but it's in the deep Sahara. So it's much more isolated. So, it's one sample. There's another sample. It doesn't add much. I think we'll know a lot more in the next couple of years. They do say it's really difficult to get samples from the Sahara, but I just wonder if it's not the difficulty of getting the samples, or it's not that it's the preservation methods, but it is the fact that there aren't that many people in the Sahara. But I don't know about these sorts of things. I need to talk about out of Africa. And how this relates to out of Africa and the relation of Africans and non-Africans. So the stylized old view is you have a out of Africa population and an African population. And the out of Africa population went through this bottleneck. The bottleneck is, let's say 1 to 10,000 years. That's thousands of years. It's not a tiny bottleneck. It's 1 to 10,000 people, closer to 1,000 than 10,000. And so this bottleneck is this long bottleneck. This population, doesn't necessarily go extinct, but it's like pretty small. And then it becomes everybody outside of Africa. It becomes 7/8 of humanity at this point. Earlier on in say the 20th century, it was far more than 7/8 of humanity because Africa's population was relatively smaller. In any case, so this population is the Australian Aborigines, it's Native Americans, it's Chinese, it's South Asians, it's Middle Eastern people, it's Europeans, it's Siberians, most of the people in North Africa. It's everybody, right? This is the model. And then later we find out there's Neanderthal admixture in these people, et cetera, et cetera. And then in Africa, there's this large African population that doesn't go through the bottleneck. That's what we know, right? I'm going to talk a little too much about African structure. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Podcast would go way too long if I talked about that. But it looks like the out of Africa movement itself was actually more structured, more complicated than what we're depicting. Okay, the primary out of Africa population is the people that went into East Asia and the first settlers of Europe are the initial Upper Paleolithic. They're exploding out after 50,000 years, sweeping all across much of the world by 40,000 years ago. These are the people that mixed with Neanderthals, probably in Mesopotamia, Eastern Anatolia, Iran, 50 to 45,000 years ago. And that is the overwhelming signal of Neanderthal ancestry outside of Africa. But there is another population hypothesized by David Reich, staff scientist, one of his lead staff scientists, Yosef Lazaridis, more than a decade ago now. Might be more than a decade. It's called Baso-Eurasians, and these are people that went through the bottleneck. And the bottleneck probably happened around, let's put it around 60,000 years, okay? But the Baso-Eurasians split off first from, all the other non-African people, who are the initial Upper Paleolithic. And also, it looks like the Baso-Eurasians did not mix with Neanderthals. The best model, I think, is that the Baso-Eurasians.
Thank you for listening. To hear the rest of the monologue, please go to razib.substack.com and subscribe.